Oh, hello. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about Legions Imperialis. Now, I don't really care for Legions Imperialis, but I do have something to say about it. And before I get into what I have to say, I'm going to start with a health warning. So, I try not to be particularly negative on this channel. I'm not a big fan of negativity in general, and I think there's too much negativity in YouTube, and especially in the Warhammer space. I think negativity is quite bad for you, physiologically, right? But I have some thoughts about LI, which are critical in nature. They're not overwhelmingly positive, and I might stray into rant territory from time to time. So, if you're super hype about this game and you don't desperately need to hear someone else dunking on it, you don't have to watch this video. Now, that seems really dismissive of me, like, oh, you don't have to watch the video, guys. That's not really what I mean. I know there'll be some lovely people out there in my audience who feel almost obligated to watch every single video, even if they don't particularly care for the content of one, because they want to support me, they want to support my channel, and I thank you. But if you feel you need it, you have my permission to skip this video, because it's a little bit critical, okay? But I was asked for my thoughts on this new game that Games Workshop have launched, so here they are. We're going to start by saying all this has happened before, and all this will happen again. Do you remember the Adeptus Titanicus launch box? Really massive box full of Titans and things. I certainly remember it because I bought it. It was really pushed really hard and really talked up on Warhammer community for, I think, about a month and a half. When was the last time you saw new Adeptus Titanicus content? Can you remember? I vaguely remember a book coming out that was a compilation of previous books. Does that count? I don't think that Legions is destined for long-term support from Games Workshop. They will never be upfront about this. Every game they produce is going to have the vibe of being the next 40k, the next Age of Sigmar, the next 30k, the next Middle-earth. Those are the four core games, and Middle-earth's only a core game because they really, really want to push it as one. But is this going to be a core game? Or is it going to be like the other games in the epic scale? Is it going to disappear? Now, that might not matter to you, but you are buying into something that seems destined to become a quote-unquote dead game very quickly. Now, we explored the dead game concept in detail in a video, Should Games Workshop Let Kill Team Die, which I uploaded a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, when a game dies and stops getting new model releases, it doesn't necessarily mean the game isn't still good and the game isn't still playable and the game can't have a great community around it. But it does mean that community is going to stop growing. And people are going to drift away from the game, the community is going to shrink, and it is, once Games Workshop stops actively pushing a game, it is a slow death. Content creators like me are going to move on because, you know, new releases are the easiest thing to talk about. They're a driver for things to talk about. If you follow Warhammer YouTubers, how many videos are about, you know, the latest thing? How many videos in the Kill Team sphere are about Chaos Cults because the latest thing? How many videos in 40k are all talking about 10th, right? There is possible to do evergreen content and to come up with a video that goes, why I really like the 28mm base or whatever. Like, that is definitely a thing. But new product definitely drives content, and content definitely drives engagement in online communities, and online communities drive offline communities. So you're buying into a game that is going to struggle, you know, unless it manages to hit a real critical mass in its launch window, it's going to struggle to be something you'll find games of in the future. Speaking of dead games, so we're going to buy Adeptus Titanicus and Aeronautica Imperialis. Now, I own both of these games. I own playable forces for both of them. I own a massive force for Aeronautica, actually. They've got nearly everything you could want for the Imperial Navy. So we'll touch first on the purge of the Xenos planes from Aeronautica Imperialis. That has been well covered on a lot of YouTube, especially those YouTube channels that revel in negativity. Okay, I'm going to touch on it briefly here. When Aeronautica Imperialis launched, it was a game that was conceived as being set in the main 40k setting. So they had orcs, they had Eldar, they had Tau, they had different Xenos races. They also had some Imperial Guard planes that have also been purged, the Valkyrie, the Vendetta, and the Vulture gunship as well from Forge World. All those things have gone because the game has transitioned to being a purely 30k game, and those things don't really exist in 30k. Now, to share with you our lived experience, we had Aeronautica. I played the Imperial Navy. Mrs. T.I. primarily played the Eldar, although she did pick up some Space Marine stuff as well, because she quite likes Space Marines. That came out comparatively recently. Now, Mrs. T.I. never finished her Eldar Air Force. She was never able to pick up any Vampire bombers from Forge World, and once they announced things were going out of stock, the remaining stock of vampires evaporated, so she's never going to finish her army. So we've decided to downsize. We're going to sell the Eldar planes and the Guard planes and the books and cards we have that aren't compatible with the narrow sliver of Aeronautica Imperialis that they're deciding to still support, because we don't own enough stuff to feel like our collection is complete. And it's a decision that we've made. Now, we're lucky because I play Imperial Navy, and Mrs. T.I. was thinking of getting more Space Marine stuff, already has some Space Marine stuff, so we can still play with the Horus Heresy rules, but it is a shame. Adeptus Titanicus, yeah, it's there, it's a game. It's going to get more support now, weirdly, because they've announced there's going to be new Titans, which will also have rules in Adeptus Titanicus. But will they be balanced in Adeptus Titanicus particularly? Or will they be, Legions Imperialis first, and oh yeah, we can do something for those Adeptus Titanicus weirdos, but all the good people are over here playing Legions Imperialis, right? I don't know. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens with bases for these. So the Aeronautica bases obviously are key components for the game. They have the wheels in to track the height and speed of all of the aircraft. They're not going to be the bases supplied with those miniatures for using them in Legions. Seems really weird to say Legions and be referring to a 40k game, but I'm not going to say Legions Imperialis each time. Sorry, Major Tom. So for Legions, they're going to have different, more plain bases. So my question would be, are the Aeronautica bases and the bases for Legions going to be included in the box, so you have the choice? Or will it be, as I fear, where the Aeronautica Imperialis bases end up being a separate product that you have to direct only from the Games Workshop web store? 10 Aeronautica Imperialis flight stands for £15 or whatever. Now, Titanicus is a little bit less dire. So Titanicus, when it launched, it came on normal 40k bases, and now the Legions bases are these flat pizza-looking things. Are the new Titans going to have the choice of both? Now, the bases here matter less, right? You can play Titanicus on the Titanicus bases or on the Legions bases. It's just going to be a slightly aesthetic thing. And I suppose if they stop supplying them with the Titanicus bases and you want them, they are at least standard Games Workshop bases, so you can get them from other sources. All right. But again, hopefully they'll put both in each box. We will see. So back to talking about Legions. I don't like the infantry models that they've previewed so far. The Marines are beakies, and I know that most of you on my channel are quite positive people, and so probably are sick to death with the beaky discourse, because a lot of Horus Heresy grognards have been really going on about beakies, but unfortunately I am going to have to join them for a hot minute, because I do agree. Especially, and it boggles the mind, the Death Guard. I mean, if you play 40k Death Guard and you look at a Plague Marine, right, it's wearing corrupted Mark 3 power armor. It's so iconic for the Death Guard. They've been wearing it for 40,000 years. Have you ever seen a Death Guard in 40k in corrupted Mark 6 power armor? You don't see it. Right, so why is this a thing? Right, let's very quickly, because a fair percentage of people watching this will just play Kill Team and have no idea what's going on. I don't hate beakies in the abstract. If we're playing a game set in the Scouring or set in the Badab War, beakies would be fantastic. And they're nice models. I like the aesthetics of a beaky as its own thing, but they do not belong where they have placed them in the Horus Heresy. So power armor. Mark 1 power armor, thunder armor, never worn by Space Marines. Forget about it. Right? Mark 2 and Mark 3 armor. These are the armor marks that are around at the very start of the Great Crusade, going into the start of the Horus Heresy, right? And Mark 2 armor is what every Marine wears. It's the default armor. Mark 3 armor, iron armor, is very similar looking to Mark 2, right? And it's a little bit more hardened and a little bit more slow, and it's for like sieges, so the Iron Warriors love it, right? And it's for Void War and boarding actions and that kind of thing, right? Mark 4 gets invented. Now, by this point, Horus has not yet declared himself to be a traitor, but he is scheming to betray the Emperor. So he decides that all the Mark IV suits are going to be funneled to the legions that he knows are going to side with him. So his own legion, the Sons of Horus, the Emperor's children, the Night Lords, the Word Bearers, the things like that. Right? He gets those Mark IV suits sent to those legions. Now, some legions, like the Death Guard, don't particularly take to them because they like the heavier Mark III armor, even though they're a traitor legion, and many of the loyalist legions do get their hands on some Mark IV armor as well, right? So it's not a hard and fast rule, but generally, Mark IV traitors, Mark III loyalists, generally speaking, right? And that's how things go as we get into the start of the Horus Heresy. Now, during the Horus Heresy, you've got a thing called Mark V. Mark V is, if you look at a modern Chaos Space Marine, generally speaking, they're in a corrupted version of Mark V armor. So Mark V armor is really, really famous for having all the studs. Mark V armor's, I think the background's gone back and forth on this. Originally, Mark V armor was just a field repair pattern, and it was a catch-all for the vague mishmash of armor marks that Marines were wearing during the Horus Heresy. I think now there is such a thing as production Mark V, but again, I think this kind of varies a little bit by Forge World and is not very consistent, and is supposed to be just, we're in the midst of a long grinding war. Mark V is kind of a make-do what we have thing, right? Now, Mark VI comes along and is invented by the Loyalists, right? And it's supposed to be an upgrade on all the previous armor marks with new technology in. That the beak is supposed to be full of like sensor equipment, so it's a bit lighter, a bit less protective, but you can move really quickly in it, and it's great for scouting and things like that. And the initial suits of Mark VI are gifted to the remains of the Raven Guard. That's why you've got the iconic Raven Guard in the beaky helmets, because ravens' beaks, and it's even called Corax pattern. Informally, it's Mark VI Corax pattern armor, right? Or Corvus pattern, one or the other. And, really iconic. And it's distributed to some of the other Loyalist legions. And then, the Alpha legions steal a whole bunch, because the Alpha Legion also like that kind of lightweight scouting reconnaissance work. So it's really good for them. And, a few bits here and there get disseminated to other legions. But I don't think any of the... Prior to them changing the law, when they launched the new launch box for Horus Heresy 2nd Edition, where they just kind of said, oh yeah, everyone has Mark VI now, and they always have, without really explaining it, no traitor legion would have fielded a company-sized force of all Mark VI. Right? Least of all, the Death Guard, who rejected Mark IV for being too lightweight and temperamental, and preferred to stick to their Mark II and Mark III. And yet here you have a box of beakies, and they're painted as Death Guard, which just seems like a... if you wanted to annoy people as much as possible, and you were going to go, we know people are wound up about these beakies, let's make them Death Guard. Right? Let's make them Death Guard. I don't understand. I think they're trying to wind up people like me. And the Solar Auxilia are disappointing in a whole different way. So the Solar Auxilia are really cool in 30k, the actual full-size range. I've included a picture down here, because you may not know what a Solar Auxilia is. They're a human force, and they're kind of designed after kind of retro-futuristic sci-fi stuff, like Flash Gordon. Right, they got this kind of look in mind where it's kind of half space and half kind of Jules Verne submarine stuff, And I just think so much of what makes them cool is lost taking the scale down to that tiny size. And this is because Marines, Space Marines, were invented in an era where actually models were pretty chunky and bland. And so they have a really strong silhouette, right? So you can shrink down a Marine and have it look like a Marine, and it works. Because Marines were designed to have a really iconic look on the tabletop. You know, the backpacks, the chunky shoulder pads, the big feet. Like, they have a look, and it's very strong, and it's very iconic, and it's why a Space Marine is such a powerful brand. The Solar Auxilia are from a totally different time. They're a very finely cast, highly detailed, realistically proportioned resin army. And when you shrink them down to tiny little epic dudes, they just look like generic sci-fi dudes, right? Like, they don't look like anything. They just look like guys with rifles. They don't look Solar Auxilia. They don't look interesting. They're just some sci-fi troopers. And I don't care for them. It didn't have to be this way. I want to sell you an alternate product. So imagine if their launch box for this game was themed around the drop site massacre, and it had two forces of Marines, and in the box they were themed around the Emperor's Children versus the Iron Hands. You know, Fulgrim, and we wouldn't include Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus, although amazing if you did little Primarchs in this scale, wouldn't it, right? Fulgrim and Ferrus Manus, but themed around that, right? And so you'd have all the Mark IV that you could paint as Emperor's Children, and all the Mark III or Mark II or Mark III mixture as you could paint as Iron Hands. And then if you wanted to paint them with a healthy edition of vehicles for both sides, right? And if you wanted to paint them all the same colour and field them as one army, you totally could. Right? And it would make more sense as a mixed army than some Marines and some Solar Auxilia does. So the armies look totally distinct. They can easily mingle together to be a larger coherent Marine force for any Legion. And people who are going to buy a Horus Heresy themed product are probably fine with it being Marines on Marines. That's what the whole range is predicated on, right? So that box would have piqued my interest. You know, we could have picked it up. I could have done my Emperor's Children. Mrs. T.I. could have taken the Iron Hands and painted them as salamanders instead. Works perfectly well. And we could have played out some games set on Istvan and then gradually built up our forces. That would have been pretty cool. But instead we were giving beakies and Solar Auxilia. Ugh. Let me know in the comments if you'd preferred a Dropsite Massacre themed starter box. I do like the vehicles. So at this scale, I do like the vehicles. I've got some little knights for Adeptus Titanicus. They're really awesome. But if I want to play Titans, I'll play Adeptus Titanicus. If I want to play aircraft, I'll play Aeronautica Imperialis. Because the Titan, Adeptus Titanicus does Titans justice, and Aeronautica Imperialis does planes justice. And I feel like in Legions, the Titans can't help but feel less like Titans, and the aircraft can't help but feel less like aircraft. So, if I was pressured to play Legions Imperialis, because I had friends that really wanted to, it's not going to happen, because if anything, Zimbad is more sceptical on this game than I am. I'd collect a Battle of Talon-inspired tank army, right? Because the tanks, I think they're the cool new bit, right? I'd just get like, I don't know, 50 little Lehman Russes and line them on the tabletop, and I think that would be quite cool, right? Don't know if it'd be any good, and I feel like the Lehman Russ, if you want to play a tank company, you can play 10 Lehman, it's canonically 10 Lehman Russes, you can fit that in 2,000 points, you can play 40k. And you probably, if what you love is Lehman Russes, you probably get more joy out of having those 10 big 40k Lehman Russes than you would out of having 50 epic scale Lehman Russes. I think. Right. Final thoughts. Unless something drastic happens, Legion Imperialis will not be featuring again on this channel, but do let me know where you are if you are curious about the game. Feel free to argue with me, even in the comments. I might even argue back if I decide to, but I'm interested to know your thoughts. If you're massively big on this game, let me know, right? Good to get a feeling for it. Hope you enjoyed the video. Do let me know if you agree with me as well, because it's nice to know where the numbers are on that, right? Comment if you've got a comment. Subscribe if you haven't. Join the Discord. You do need to expand the comment, and you'll find all the magic links for the Discord and things like that in the expanded comment. And do consider channel membership. And finally, this is the second time I'm recording this video because OBS decided to screw up all my microphone settings. So if you detect any sound issues, I'd love to hear about those as well. Alright, bye guys, have a great evening, bye bye bye.